Good morning, everybody. Bom dia a todos. Please take your seats. Welcome to this session on mining. On behalf of IIED, I'm Steve Bass, and on behalf of our co-host, the International Council on Mining and Metals, welcome to this Sunday morning. My goodness, what could we be doing on Sunday morning? We're here, that's great. We could be at church hearing the confessions of the mining industry. I have to confess that I'm a forester, not a miner. I hope that's okay. Pit props, charcoal, you need it. Actually, 10 years ago, at Johannesburg 2002, the World Summit, IIED released this big book, Breaking New Ground. It was an assessment of the state of the mining industry. I had a little role then because I had worked on a previous report on the state of the paper industry. So this was released exactly 10 years ago. And we thought, along with our colleagues at ICMM, 10 years later, it really is worth looking back at the baseline we established. How is the mining and metals industry dealing with the issues of sustainable development? Has it actually picked this up? So we thought this was a very relevant occasion. Abby here from IIED will present in 10 minutes the findings of a very brief review on progress. Has the mining industry really made progress? What remains? What are the new challenges? Today is a different world from 10 years. Then we're going to have a panel discussion. The first discussion will, in a sense, look back on those 10 years and address where has there been progress, where are there gaps, what are we really struggling with. And for this panel, we're actually really pleased to have a great mix of people. At the end here, we have Caroline Digby. Now, Caroline managed the research for this work and actually wrote the words on behalf of an enormous team. So Caroline, I think, can remember what we did 10 years ago, but now she's a sustainability manager for the Eden Project, which is an amazing educational and tourism resource in Britain, built on essentially an old mine. When you come to Britain, visit the Eden Project, your life will change. Next to Caroline, we have Lina Villacordoba, who's the Executive Director of the Alliance for Responsible Mining, which was very influenced, I believe, by this MMSD study. She has a focus on the artisanal and small-scale mining industry, that informal area, which is extremely significant in terms of numbers. So she's going to look, I think, probably a little bit more at perhaps progress in that area. And then on my left, we have Ben Peachy from the ICMM, and he's Director of Communications, not just communication to us, but I guess engagement within the industry, helping to drive change. So that panel will talk about the past and remaining challenges. And then we are going to have some guests who are seated at the front here. They will join us because we're going to say, what next? How do we tackle those really difficult issues that still beset the industry? And the best way to look forward is to choose a case example that could be an illustration of what we might be doing in 10 years' time. So our colleagues here from Anglo-American Nickel, Walter de Simone and Sergio Andrade, will talk through a case study. They will be talking Portuguese, so if you haven't got one of these and you need it, get it by then. And then we're going to have a discussion amongst the audience and amongst the panel on what else do we need to do to move forward, to tackle the real problems that remain in this difficult but essential industry. So if that's acceptable to everybody, and I hope it is, I'm not taking any questions about that, I'm going to pass over to Abby, who wasn't around in IIED at the time of MMSD, and so has taken a very fresh look, but in consultation with many stakeholders. So Abby, you've got about 10 minutes to put us up to speed. Thanks.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me on this? Yeah? Is that okay? Okay, well, firstly, to reiterate Steve's point, thank you very much for coming on a Sunday morning in Rio. I'm sure everyone would like to be sitting on the beach and things, so thank you very much. As Steve said, I'm going to do very much a whistle-stop tour of the paper and the findings, but you all have, I think, papers on the seat, so you get a chance to read it further, and the panel will speak in depth to some of the points. So, as Steve said, 10 years ago, the mining industry, what drove MMSD was really... So the reason the mining industry undertook MMSD, it was actually part of the Global Mining Initiative, where the mining industry decided it was time to engage with its critics. It had always had a relatively adversarial relationship with NGOs up to that point and others, civil society, and really wanted to understand better the language and go forward and try and improve its reputation in sustainability. So MMSD was really a groundbreaking study of research, independent research, and stakeholder engagement. So Caroline will speak to it being both an outcome and a process. And we've got the reports and the research, but as important was the stakeholder engagement. I think over 700 stakeholders were engaged over the time. So, and as Steve said, submitted to the 2002. So 10 years on, IIED asked the question, how has the industry fared? The three questions I asked to people I spoke to about, fine, I don't need it, doesn't matter. I spoke to about 40 stakeholders across the industry, civil society, companies, academics, consultants, people who had been involved in MMSD, as well as those who were new and weren't as familiar, but asked, okay, how has the industry fared over the last 10 years? What have been the big achievements? What have been the ongoing challenges? And where are we going next, really? So that's what we bring here today, and I'll be able to share with you just a few of the findings from that report. Sorry, I can see everyone kind of getting translations and things, but I think we're all fine. Okay. So one of the biggest findings, and this highlights success really, as far as I can tell, is that understanding of sustainable development has really improved among the mining sector over the last 10 years. When I spoke to companies, they understood the language, they were able to engage, they know the terminology far better than they did 10 years ago. There is a clear sense of what best practice mining looks like, what sustainable mining looks like. And this was really important because it was the first step that MMSD outlined as to supporting sustainable development. The first step would be understanding. So one of the big things helping this understanding is the number of international initiatives. Fantastic. So 10 years ago, I'm sure it won't surprise many of you, we didn't have the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, the OECD guidelines on multinational enterprises, the IFC performance standards. All these things are really helping the industry understand what best practice sustainable development and mining might look like. And all in all, I would say that from what I have spoken to, that this is reflected in company policies at a strategic level, in the boardroom, in the headquarters of many mining companies. Most mining companies have policies on sustainable development that reflect some of the findings of MMSD. However, there are ongoing challenges, and I would say the highlight point to all of this, and it's certainly not across the board and a generalization, but there is a sense that mining companies are still struggling to always put those organizational policies into practice. The issues there's inconsistency across the sector. Some of the biggest mining companies in the world are getting it right and have big social teams, not always getting it right, but the juniors and the mid-tier companies continue to have a lack of resources, a lack of skills to be able to implement some of the sustainable development issues and advances that we would hope to see. And there continues to be that capacity lacking. As I said earlier, even the big mining companies are not always getting it right. Some of the companies I spoke to demonstrate a really clear understanding of sustainable development, or also those who are in the media all the time and seen to be exposed to sustainability challenges, issues on the ground, environmental disasters, social disasters. They're also not immune to getting it wrong. And they're really just facing a very complex local situation. The environmental challenges seem to be easier to address with technical solutions, whereas the social challenges continue really to be more of a challenge. And all the companies I spoke to said they really need to get communities right. They need to get the community development issue right in the next 10 years. There still continues to be little supply chain focus. MMSD recommended an integrated approach to minerals with greater vertical integration of the mineral chain, great view up to consumption, and there is very little advancement on that. However, we are seeing a change in that, mainly driven by the conflict minerals agenda, more chain of custody, more certifications, etc., that is moving this issue forward. So it might be that this is an issue that's just coming into its own and may take off over the next 10 years. Artisanal and small-scale mining. Lena will talk more to this, I've no doubt, but it continues to be an area that is underfunded, neglected, not considered really a true industry player, and taken forward and seen as, if we're going to take the mining industry up, we need to include the ASM, the artisanal miners, and they also need to be brought up. And finally, the biggest challenge of everyone I spoke to, almost I would say a third of interviewees that I spoke to listed lack of government capacity as the single biggest challenge facing the industry in the next 10 years. It really is the key thing, and as we move into a new context of resource nationalism and issues and human rights, this is going to become more and more important and really needs to be on the top of the agenda. So moving quickly on, how might the agenda look today? Well, firstly, the context has changed. Not entirely. Many of the issues, it's amazing how relevant MMSD is. It was a very holistic and wide-ranging report, and many of the issues you could go back to today and go, yeah, that's right, that's the same as it is now. However, in some ways, the context has changed. Firstly, societal expectations from mining have increased. This is seen at the community level, more social movements, really driving, we want to see more from mining. A lot of the companies I spoke to said one of the biggest challenges, the communities they now face are far more aware. They know their rights, they know they have really high expectations, and they want to see benefits, and companies are having to respond to that. Arguably, this is also one of the drivers, but certainly not the only driver, of this new wave of resource nationalism, which is a catch-all phrase, as you will know, from getting an increase in equity stake in mining to increasing taxes, reforming policy laws. There's certainly a lot of that going on. In the last year, we've seen massive changes in Chile, Australia, South Africa, and mining companies are having to adapt to that. What is the social contract for mining going to look like moving forward? What does resource nationalism mean for sustainable development? How do we deal with this? Growth of emerging markets. China and India were certainly not small in 2002, but there is a sense that we need to engage with them more. What does sustainability from these companies look like, from these consumers look like? What is working alongside a Chinese mining company going to be, and how are they going to adopt the standards that the Western mining companies have tried to adopt? Human rights, thanks to John Ruggie, we're all having to engage with human rights, very much on the corporate agenda now, shaping community development and free, prior, informed consent. What are we going to do with that going forward? What does that mean for mining companies? How do we implement it? What exactly does it mean? And continues to be a challenge. Climate change. We're in Rio, and it's very much, as always, on the agenda. Pressures on resources, water and energy. Mining companies here will know those operational pressures very well. But what does that mean from a sustainability perspective? How are they going to deal with that? And finally, we're in Rio, +20, the green economy. As far as I can tell, the mining industry hasn't really been engaged in the green economy debate. There has been some work, but for example, copper, I think the Copper Association has done some work on seeing their benefits and opportunities in the green economy. But what exactly does that mean? Well, how are governments going to respond if they do adopt this new agenda? What is that going to look like? Okay. So these are some of the voices we heard, and some people in the room might recognize these phrases, so apologies. Firstly, in 2002, it was about why we're mining. Now it's about how are we mining. No longer is it about just impacts, but about mining's contribution to development and possibility for net positives. The industry needs to become the development partner that countries are looking for. This was a phrase I heard at the Indaba in Cape Town, and I think given the new context, what exactly is the development partner? Who delivers on the ground? Is that changed? Has that changed? We must stop talking about taxes and start discussing obligations. FPIC, is it the new no-go for social issues? You can't mine on World Heritage sites. Do we need to be talking about FPIC in the same way? Free, prior, and prompt consent, sorry. And ASM, it's an artisanal mining. It's an opportunity, not a problem. Let's look at the structural reasons for why it's not working and seek to address those. So those are just some of the points and many more. We've written this report. It's very much a conversation starter. It's a discussion paper. At IIED, we are trying to encourage more people to put their voices forward and contribute. And I only spoke to 40 stakeholders, and there are many more. So we look forward to hearing your views today, but also going forward. Please get in touch, and it'd be great to hear from you. Sorry.
Thanks, Abby. That was excellent. And please, if you haven't picked up one of these, they should be available. The slim summary of a very brief review, which Abby has summarized, and we would like to enrich in the coming months to help the industry move towards a new and perhaps very tough agenda. So now I'm going to turn to our panelists for the first half of the session, which is looking back over the last 10 years. From your three perspectives, how has the industry progressed? This is, in a sense, the good news bit, your perspective on how it's progressed. I'm then going to ask a second question about not so much the bad news, maybe the tough challenges. So how has the industry progressed over the last 10 years? And I'm going to turn first to Caroline, the principal author of the original study, a researcher. It's in your head. What is your reflection about how some of the ideas and findings in the MMSD have gone through the industry? Have they picked it up? And where have they picked it up? A couple of minutes, please, Caroline.
Thanks, Steve. It's amazing to think it was 10 years ago that we were in Johannesburg presenting the recommendations from the report. And I sat down last week to try and reflect what, if I had to say in 2 minutes, what I thought MMSD did. I think I'd like to make really quickly just 4 points about where I think it was important, and I think then get on rather quickly to some of the challenges that remain. But for me, I think that what the report did was it was probably the first attempt in the mining sector to collate and synthesize the experience, the research, the perspectives of the various different groups, major groups involved in the sector. And that allowed us, though we were constrained by having to get the report in time for Johannesburg, but it allowed us to come up with some sort of coherent agenda about what the issues across the mining sector were. I think it's really important, and we struggled a lot with, at the time, of distinguishing between the mining industry and the mining sector. And when I use the word sector, I mean all the people that are involved and are impacted by mining. So governments and civil society and communities and all of those people. And I think people are the use of the word industry all the time really masks then the problems we have, which is that there's quite a lot of capacity in industry, but not a lot of capacity in the sector. So I just wanted to make that point. Second thing I think we did that was important was to highlight the importance of the social, economic and cultural issues which had historically played second fiddle to the environmental impacts of mining. So to put them on as equal partners on the table. Third thing I think we did was to pull together and identify what good practice, I'm not saying best practice, good practice for responsible mining looked like in different regions, and what resources, guidelines, rules were out there. Now, in the last 10 years, there's been an extraordinarily burgeoning library of guidance on good practice, guidelines on all aspects of mining and sustainable development. But at the time, we were clear to signpost where those resources were and where they were coming from. I think we now have in place all sorts of rules. It'll be about what we do with them that'll be important. And then the fourth point I wanted to make was, I think we drew attention to the need for a much more interdisciplinary, collaborative, integrated approach that drew on experience from outside of the mining sector as well as the expertise within the sector. And that allowed a large group of people to start to ask different questions and ask the right questions that moved us away from the old style confrontational single issue, let's pick off one thing at a time and get the mining industry to respond to this. I think what MMSD did was say, okay, sustainable development's about trade-offs and we need to look at these issues more holistically.
Very many thanks, Caroline. I remember the mining industry at the time being quite willing to accept lessons from the forest sector. It's non-threatening. We offered a safe space for them to pick up those ideas. So, great. Ben, can I turn to you to shed some light on ICM, perhaps in terms of collective action, how you've helped? I'll shed some light in another way as well.
Thank you. So I think from an industry perspective, we should go back to the foundation, really, of the organisation I work for. So the MMSD report, as I say, was launched at the Johannesburg Summit, but it also was launched at a mining conference held in Toronto in 2002 that marked the end of that independent research project that was funded by industry but run independently by IIED. At that conference, the founding members of ICMM signed a declaration called the Toronto Declaration that committed them to move forward on the agenda and the issues that were identified through MMSD. I would resonate with what both Caroline and Abby said. In many ways, one of the key successes of MMSD was it really did identify the issues that the industry needed to work on. And the industry at that time made a commitment to work on those issues. And when I say industry, I should sort of stop for those of you who don't know ICMM. ICMM is a representative group of large companies in the mining sector. It currently has 22 members, and it is most of the biggest mining companies in the world now. For those of you who know the industry, so it's companies like Anglo American, who you'll be hearing from today, Vale, who are based here in Brazil, Xstrata, BHP Billiton, Rio Tinto, and other companies. Since then, those companies who are members of ICMM, they signed up to a set of performance standards that has been progressively developed over the years. So in 2003, ICMM created a set of 10 sustainable development principles that came directly from the MMSD study. And the companies who were in ICMM committed to uphold those principles. In 2005, they made a commitment to report on their performance against those principles using the Global Reporting Initiative framework. And ICMM as an organisation was asked to work with the GRI to create a sector supplement for the mining and metals sector. And then in 2008, the members signed up to a commitment for independent assurance, i.e. that they would get independent assurance by a third party that they were in fact reporting in accordance with the GRI framework and upholding the principles as they said they would. Today, if a company wants to join ICMM, they have to sign up to that performance framework, and we have a due diligence process where if a company wants to join ICMM, we have an independent review panel that will go in, work with that company to understand whether they are able to meet those performance standards. And then we as an organisation, each year, we report how the companies are doing. In our last annual report, I think 17 of our members were reporting at an A+ standard at GRI guidelines, which is the highest standard you can have, and the ones that weren't there are the members that have joined most recently. Yeah, and for me, what that says is that there's a good message there. These performance commitments aren't things you can do overnight. It means building sustainability into your practices. And look, I wanted to use my time to say that was the real achievement, is that the industry said they would do something, they've done something, they've tried to transparently address how they're addressing the issues that are identified through MMSD. And we continue to do that. The members are committed to continuous performance improvement. Have they solved all the problems? No, they haven't, but they're working on it. And again, the final thing I would say is go back, I would agree with what Caroline and Abby were saying. How one implements against the good practices that have been identified continues to be the challenge. And it will continue to be the challenge into the future. Every new operation has its own set of challenges. And the stakeholders that Caroline talks about all need to be involved. And so for me, the big achievement is that the industry is willing to do that and is engaging. And we will hear from the example in Anglo-American later about how one company is doing that at the moment. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. Now, Lena, the Abby's report, I think, showed that perhaps there has been less progress than we'd like to see in terms of thinking of artisanal and small-scale miners as potentially positive contributors to development. What's your view on progress in that part of the industry?
Well, I think progress in the artisanal mining sector has been limited, and I'll take that question further in the next round. Okay. But I think there's momentum that is happening that can really make a difference looking 10 years ahead. One of the things that I find very significant for those that weren't around 10 years ago is that the concept of sustainable development in mining is there all the time. I mean, you can no longer think about mining or companies can no longer address issues without having to address sustainability issues. So I think that's a very positive thing. The idea of sustainability in the industry came around to stay, and it's going to have to be addressed. And I think that's a very important achievement. The other that I want to recognize is that you really have found like a strong commitment from the industry in very high levels. You find CEOs of important mining companies involved in broader sustainability discussions, and I think that's a very positive thing in terms of what can be achieved and how partnerships can be built with the industry. But I still think there's like a huge challenge of embedding sustainability all the way down. And then a third thing that I see some progress, or at least would want to see some progress, but I think the bases are there, is the whole issue of consumer awareness. I mean, I think consumers have a bit more understanding of where minerals come from. I mean, I think 10 years ago, the gap between the consumer and mining was really big. And of course, there's many challenges because it's a very complex sector and there's very complex realities. But I think consumers are now wondering where these things come from and asking about the needs of recycling and asking many questions. And I think that's another important driver that comes from all of this.
Thanks, Lena. And that's the good news in a sense. So now My mic is off. Okay, there's a lovely red bit. So now I think we have to look forward to look to the challenges here. I mean, from what I've been hearing, we have to start to think about the sector rather than the industry. We have to think about government capacity to make this sector really deliver sustainable development. We have to think about companies not just signing up to a framework at the level of policy and commitment, but actually at every mine, making it operational and people knowing this. And we have to think potentially about incentives to conserve and recycle rather than just dig more. I mean, these are the sort of things as a non-miner I would expect to be big challenges. So now I'll turn to the panel again. We could look at challenges in many ways. You could just list the problems. Or perhaps I could ask the question, if we were to meet again in 10 years' time from now, what would be the one big challenge that you really think must be addressed in the sector? I'll start with you again, Caroline.
I've got a very long list.
Go on then.
I have to prioritise. I guess for me the biggest disappointment 10 years on is there's really no mechanism at the global, at the international level for this agenda to be updated, reprioritised, for the dialogue to continue. ICMM, I think, the industry has done a great job, and they. ICMM has done a great job, but in some senses their agenda is so huge that they have focused on developing good practice and guidance for their own members. And what is missing is some sort of mechanism to figure out what are the priorities of communities and governments, and how do these changing imperatives affect how we prioritize this agenda. So I really think that we still need to look at how we can bring the various different major groups and the new players into the dialogue. If you look at who was in the room and was involved in our process 10 years ago, all of the key players have changed, whether it's in the companies, in the financial institutions. So there's a real ongoing need to get people to update on this agenda. We've all mentioned all these different new standards and guidelines and rules that have come out over the last 10 years. So we have the rules now. I don't really care if companies are going against Global Compact or ICMM or IFC standards or whatever. If they were performing well against any of those, we'd be far better along the road than we currently are. And I think the problem is there are three aspects to that, aren't there? You need rules, then you need to understand that the rules are being implemented, and you need something that says what you do when there's non-compliance. And I think we focused on the first bit, and we still haven't got the monitoring and the non-compliance or sanctions for non-compliance really sorted out. And then another point, is around just lack of resources, lack of capacity, lack of resources. So when people say, well, what are governments doing about the agenda? And they say, oh, there's the Intergovernmental Forum on Mining and Sustainable Development. But from my mind, that has struggled over the last 10 years on kindness and no funding and in-kind support from various developed country governments. And actually, that is not the way for governments to build capacity across a whole range of activities they have. So resources outside the industry.
Excellent. Thank you, Caroline. That's a great framing. I'm going to move straight to Ben. Your top contribution in the next 10 years, what would you like to see? Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess I'd sort of pick up one of the points that Lena was making, really. And for me, it's about trying to come better at communicating what the contribution of the industry to sustainable development is. We need to be a lot better as an industry of doing that and engaging in the debate. So let's take the green economy debate. Minerals and metals are undoubtedly a part of the picture in moving towards a green economy, whatever that green economy looks like. And so the industry needs to be engaged in that debate. What are the impacts of minerals and metals over their life cycle? You know, we need to continue to get minerals out of the ground. So how can we do that in the right way? And in order to build the trust and engagement with the communities, you know, and that be that with local communities or I would say the communities of trust you need to have, so that would be with governments and with other actors as well, needs to be done on a basis of understanding what the contribution of mining is. So I think for me that's the real challenge, is how do you have that open, honest engagement and keep working on building the trust. I think the thing that MMSD really achieved, you know, I'll say it again, it identified what the issues are. And certainly when we as an organisation look and prioritise the work that we should be doing, broadly speaking, the issues haven't changed. How you address those issues and how you keep improving your contribution on those issues is the real challenge. And I think that's where I'd like to focus. Thank you.
Excellent. And Lena?
Thank you, Steve. Here I will focus on artisanal mining, and here's where I get all passionate. I think the big issue with artisanal and small-scale mining, the big challenge, is that there's still lots of ambiguity out there as to what we should do about artisanal and small-scale mining. So still now, 10 years after MMSD, we get visions of people that believe artisanal mining should be erased from the face of the earth. Then you get a vast majority thinking about artisanal mining as a purely developmental issue. And then there's a few players thinking that actually artisanal and small-scale mining can be a profitable and responsible activity that contributes to development at the local level. And that's where I would like to see the thinking towards artisanal mining evolve. And along those lines, that evolution would have to be reflected in how we deal with it. I mean, we've been dealing with artisanal mining insufficiently from a developmental perspective, and still we have a stronger challenge to deal with it as a business, as a sector, to bring opportunities for artisanal mining to develop as an industry, as part of the industry. I mean, access to credit, entrepreneurial capacities, all of these capacities that governments are perhaps the least responsible or capable of delivering these needs. I think ASM is too big of an issue in the industry to be ignored. It's 90% of the people working in gold, for example. 90% of the people, they produce only the 10% of the production, but it's too many faces to be ignored. So I think we need to get a more clear idea of how we understand artisanal mining and then move towards bringing them into the industry as legitimate players. That's what I would like to see in 10 years.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Some great perspectives there. And that's just a quick view looking back on the last 10 years. We're going to have a chance as an audience to discuss this a little bit later. We're now going to move towards the second half of the panel, moving forward. And we've heard things like we need to think about the sector progressing with all its stakeholders, not just the industry. Is there a sector dialogue, a sector organisation? How do we know that the mines reflect what communities, localities want? How can we see small-scale players as a legitimate part of the industry? What kind of collective action is needed? And how do we really deliver these good intentions on the ground and prove it? And deliver goods and services that are needed for a green economy? Sorts of challenges we face here. Now, you know, we can create a kind of wish list of nice things we'd like to see, or we can look at an example that's trying to hold itself up as perhaps helping to pave the way towards an industry that would be a robust contributor to sustainable development and livelihoods for the future. So we have asked Anglo-American Nickel, to present a case that they would like to say is not necessarily best practice, but gives us some hints about the way in which the industry might work in the future and engage. And we'll not exactly hold this up to a trial, but we'll start to interrogate the offering. So I'd like to call up, please, Walter Gisimoni, who's the Chief Executive of Anglo-American Nickel, based here. And an interesting partnership here, Sergio Andrade, who's the Executive Director of Agenda Pública, which is a civil society non-profit group trying to push people, government, to be more responsive. And indeed, they're very welcome. Just to let you know that they will be speaking in Portuguese, porque é uma língua bonita, and since we've had to rent these things to justify this historic cost, so those of us that need it, pop it on. So now Walter's going to talk about some of the innovations that he'd like to share that might help us with the next 10 years in relation to community development and partnership. And then Sergio is going to complement this on how government capacity needs to work with this kind of partnership approach. So 5 minutes, Walter, 5 minutes, Sergio. And I'll give you a friendly warning. Okay, off you go.
Ok, bom dia a todos. Em primeiro lugar, eu quero agradecer ao IIED por podermos participar dessa sessão. Muito obrigado. E é um prazer estar aqui para compartilhar a experiência da Anglo-América nas nossas práticas, né, de desenvolvimento sustentável. Bem, vou falar um pouquinho da Anglo-América, só para quem não conhece. A Anglo-América é uma das maiores empresas de mineração do mundo. E nós temos aqui no Brasil 4 unidades. Nós temos a unidade de produção de níquel, de nióbio, fertilizantes de fosfato e minério de ferro. Bem, eu vou focar um pouco mais na nossa operação em Barro Alto, onde nós trouxemos um exemplo de inovação, e que, só para lembrar, a Anglo-América, em termos de desenvolvimento sustentável, foi uma das 10 empresas fundadoras da Iniciativa Global da Mineração em 1998 e que teve diversas linhas de ação, né, incluindo a busca por melhores práticas para a indústria e que levou as empresas a elegerem o IIED para realizar essa revisão global, que contou com a contribuição de mais de 50 mil pessoas e que se tornou o que nós conhecemos como MMSD e que continua até hoje. É o maior processo liderado por um único stakeholder envolvendo múltiplos stakeholders. Ok? Nós vamos falar da nossa unidade de níquel, que é formada pelas operações de Niquelândia e Barro Alto, no estado de Goiás, e Loma de Níquel, na Venezuela. A ambição da Anglo é ser uma empresa líder global em mineração. E para nós isso significa ser o investimento de escolha, o parceiro de escolha e o empregador por escolha. E faz parte da nossa estratégia para atingir esses objetivos operar de maneira segura, sustentável e socialmente responsável. E para ajudar nesse trabalho, a Anglo-América desenvolveu um conjunto de ferramentas para avaliação do impacto socioeconômico em todas as atividades onde ela está atuando, ou seja, desde projetos até operação. Essa ferramenta é o SEAT, S-E-A-T, que é a sigla em inglês para Socioeconomic Assessment Toolbox. O SEAT tem sido reconhecido internacionalmente pela eficácia dessa ferramenta, inclusive já foi premiada pelo Banco Mundial, eleita uma das melhores ferramentas de avaliação socioambiental, de impacto socioeconômico do mundo. E essa ferramenta, inclusive nós estamos na 3ª versão, e ela já foi disponibilizada, está disponibilizada para quem tiver mais interesse e inclusive quiser usá-la é só acessar o site da Anglo-América, angloamerica.com, que está lá disponível para quem quiser usar e conhecer um pouco melhor. Bem, na prática, o uso do CIET nos permite avaliar a infraestrutura da região, serviços de qualidade e de vida da população, enfim, conhecendo a realidade local, o que nos permite identificar maneiras de intervir e contribuir para o desenvolvimento sustentável das comunidades. E com base nessa avaliação, é desenvolvido um plano de envolvimento das comunidades, onde a Anglo-América participa como facilitadora em todos os sentidos, tanto técnico quanto financeiro. Em Barro Alto, as atividades foram desenvolvidas desde o início do projeto, ainda na fase de pesquisa e exploração, buscando sempre parcerias com o governo local e organizações comunitárias, sempre visando o desenvolvimento da região. E a primeira avaliação foi feita em Barro Alto, foi em 2005, usando essa ferramenta que eu me referi, que é o CIET, foi identificado que nós poderíamos oferecer um suporte técnico para a Prefeitura Municipal. E com base, poderíamos oferecer esse suporte técnico porque foi identificada uma necessidade da administração pública. E com base nessa necessidade, a Anglo-América buscou um parceiro para cuidar desse ponto específico. E o que levou a empresa a articular a parceria com a ONG Agenda Pública, que está aqui, né, o representador Sérgio, e que vai poder explicar em detalhes todo esse trabalho que a gente está fazendo lá. E o motivo de termos escolhido entre tantos parceiros e tantos projetos que a gente tem, esse trabalho com a Agenda Pública como exemplo, é porque nós consideramos esse trabalho realmente uma verdadeira inovação social. Nós acreditamos que realmente é um trabalho que pode nos ajudar a trazer grandes resultados, e já está trazendo. É um trabalho focado no fortalecimento institucional e na mudança de uma cultura política, o que realmente nós precisamos muito, né? E esse é um trabalho que a gente considera fundamental quando nós falamos em desenvolvimento sustentável, não só na área de mineração. Eu acho que ele se aplica para qualquer tipo de segmento, né? Isso porque as empresas, sem dúvida, todas as empresas, podem e devem gerar um impacto produtivo nas comunidades em que atuam, gerando emprego, renda, melhorias de infraestrutura, só para citar alguns exemplos. Mas, afinal, nós acreditamos que a boa gestão pública e o engajamento da sociedade é que vão permitir que esse impacto positivo se multiplique e que se torne sustentável. Para isso, nós consideramos que é muito importante que a sociedade volte a perceber a atividade política como essencial e que saiba eleger, né, os seus representantes, seus governantes. E com base nessas premissas, o trabalho da agenda pública se dá em diversas frentes. Desde a capacitação da prefeitura em termos de gestão de processos, até o engajamento e preparação dos cidadãos para atuarem ativamente. Inclusive os mais jovens, acho que principalmente os mais jovens, que vão constituir aí o futuro de tudo, né? E como eu falei aqui no começo, eu acho que nós consideramos esse trabalho uma verdadeira inovação social, e a boa inovação é aquela que a gente considera que pode ser replicada. E a partir desse trabalho que nós fizemos em Barro Alto, estamos fazendo em Barro Alto, nós já estamos replicando esse trabalho em outras unidades da América, que é Niquelândia. A Niquelândia é uma outra produtora de níquel que já estamos com mais de 30 anos de operação. E o interessante é que, mesmo depois de 30 anos de atuação, a gente vê que a gente ainda pode inovar, que a gente pode fazer coisas diferentes e que a gente pode aprender e está continuamente aprendendo e continuamente buscando essa maior interação nessas parcerias como a agenda pública, justamente para trazer mais benefícios para a comunidade onde a gente está. Bem, agora, eu acho também importante a gente estar aqui compartilhando isso com vocês, porque nós vamos encontrar mais oportunidades onde a gente já pode aplicar o mesmo princípio. Agora eu vou passar aqui a palavra para o Sérgio, né, que vai falar um pouco sobre o trabalho. Obrigado.
Sérgio, a sua vez.
bom dia. Eu queria agradecer ao IIED, especialmente a Anglo, ao Walter, à Juliana Refeld, pelo convite. Realmente é um prazer poder compartilhar uma experiência que vivemos tão intensamente. Acho que é muito bom poder falar sobre ela. E eu queria, antes de mais nada, falar que quem está aqui, né, acompanhando essa sessão. Nós temos o Aristides Guzmão, que é o coordenador da iniciativa lá em Barro Alto, a Suede, que é uma liderança da juventude de Barro Alto, e a Usana, que é uma liderança também, que hoje está à frente do Conselho Municipal de Assistência Social. Então, estão aqui para acompanhar e, de certa maneira, atestar o que eu estou falando, né? Eu acho que é o principal. Bem, a Agenda Pública é uma organização da sociedade civil. Nós temos sede em Brasília e em São Paulo e trabalhamos em 5 estados brasileiros. Nosso foco, basicamente, é fortalecimento da governança pública, com uma preocupação com melhoria da gestão, mas com processos de fortalecimento da transparência e engajamento, né? Participação social é uma preocupação. Quando a Anglo-América nos procurou, havia realmente uma preocupação em fortalecer capacidades do governo, né? Eu acho que era essa a tônica do processo, mas também desenvolver ações estruturantes no território, para que nós não tivéssemos ações pontuais, dispersas. Era uma preocupação fundamental que nós tivéssemos ações que pudessem perdurar no longo prazo. Falando de Barro Alto, né, o que nós temos em Barro Alto como característica? Barro Alto é um município que tem características muito semelhantes a municípios brasileiros. Ele é uma população até 20 mil habitantes, que corresponde a 76% dos municípios brasileiros. Portanto, nós não estamos falando de uma exceção, e sim de uma realidade muito presente em todo o território nacional. Nós observamos práticas muito patrimonialistas, ou seja, o uso do Estado para fins privados. E há uma tradição bastante conservadora em relação à participação, pouca abertura em relação à participação, e a gestão pública um pouco instintiva, digamos assim. Ou seja, os processos de planejamento não são muito formais, né? Há planejamentos, mas não são muito formais. E que cenário nós encontramos em Barro Alto ao começar esse trabalho? Nós tínhamos uma infraestrutura urbana precária, né? Quer dizer, nós tínhamos instrumentos propriamente de planejamento, desde ordenamento do trânsito, até ordenamento territorial mesmo, né? Pensando naquilo que fala o plano diretor, que é um instrumento que o governo brasileiro tem para regrar o território nas cidades, ainda não implementado. Um diálogo bastante frágil com a sociedade civil, né? De prefeitura e sociedade civil, muito pouco se falam de uma linguagem direta, né? Digamos assim. Mecanismos de transparência e controle social muito fragilizados, incipientes, e uma gestão pública, como eu disse há pouco, muito frágil, realmente. E pensando nos impactos que se vislumbrava com a instalação de um empreendimento do porte da operação da Anglo em Barro Alto, como todo grande empreendimento, e como empreendimentos de mineração tem como característica, há casos em que você pressupõe uma demanda maior de serviços de saúde, de educação, e isso estava entre os riscos e os impactos prováveis com a instalação do empreendimento. O aumento da arrecadação, evidentemente, ocorreria, mas o mau uso do dinheiro vem com ele se você não tem uma boa gestão planejada. Possível incidência de corrupção, intensificação da criminalidade, prostituição, uso de drogas, migrações massivas e tensão social advinda desse processo de migração e de complexificação do tecido social da cidade. Nós estamos falando de uma cidade pequena, com tradições bastante arraigadas, ou seja, muda completamente o tecido social. E, para isso, o governo precisa agir, precisa planejar para que a oportunidade de desenvolvimento não se transforme num problema, né? Então, nesse sentido, o nosso objetivo foi exatamente articular articular capacidades essenciais que o Estado precisaria ter para responder esses impactos, agindo como Estado, ou seja, respondendo aquilo que o Estado tem como prerrogativa, mas também oportunizando, que o Estado tivesse condições de oportunizar o desenvolvimento que se avizinhava. Nós investimos como estratégia no fortalecimento do capital social, né, nos processos de fortalecimento de laços de confiança, fortalecendo os arranjos participativos e, fundamentalmente, melhorando a gestão pública, buscando desenvolver essas capacidades essenciais de planejamento, de análise, de cooperação, diálogo, que eram características essenciais em se tratando de gestão. A estratégia preliminar, ela partiu de uma pactuação de expectativas, uma vez que nós não estamos falando aqui, em absoluto, de uma solução tecnocrática. Não há uma receita que se impõe ao território. Eu acho que é uma estratégia de pactuação, de conversa, em que identificamos aquilo que os atores locais...
1 minute, please.
1 minute, ok. Aquilo que os atores locais entendem como relevante e, então, nós trabalhamos nesse sentido. Entre as ações realizadas no território, nós destacamos aqui algumas rapidamente e vocês encontrarão isso bem detalhado, ou melhor, quase bem detalhado, no sumário executivo da metodologia que está ali fora com esses dois materiais, então eu vou ser bem telegráfico aqui. Nós fizemos, em conjunto com a Prefeitura, em conjunto com a Anglo, a Escola de Governo e Cidadania, tem uma ênfase metodológica construtivista, baseada em situações-problema, ou seja, abolimos PowerPoint, abolimos esse diálogo formal, normativo, que caracteriza a educação de gestores. Trabalhamos com planejamento estratégico e setorial das várias secretarias, a implementação de mecanismos de transparência e acesso à informação. Nesse caso, criamos o site da Prefeitura, capacitamos a equipe para a manutenção desse site e sua atualização, apoiamos a criação de um boletim impresso que passou a circular entre a administração pública, dando conta do que era feito pela própria Prefeitura e que não era conhecido pelos próprios secretários. A revisão, um trabalho importante, a revisão da situação legal e apoio à criação dos conselhos de políticas públicas. O Brasil tem conselhos em todas as esferas, municipal, estadual e federal. E um trabalho muito marcante de dinamização da participação social, com investimento em outras instâncias de participação, não apenas os conselhos, porque os conselhos precisam de uma ecologia na qual possam atuar, para que eles possam não atuar isoladamente. Estruturamos no plano da gestão o sistema de compras da Prefeitura, por meio de um trabalho pioneiro, a Prefeitura comprava de forma isolada. Trabalhamos com cartas de serviço ao cidadão, que é uma prática conhecida em Londres e no Reino Unido, isso é uma prática bastante conhecida, inclusive, que estabelece padrões de qualidade para a oferta dos serviços e estabelece direitos que o cidadão tem ao acessar o serviço. Terminando, trabalhamos também com um gabinete de projetos que fortalece uma equipe da Prefeitura para que eles tenham capacidade de criar projetos, monitorar projetos e que trabalhem para a Prefeitura como um todo. Então, é um birô, por assim dizer, que trabalha para a Prefeitura como um todo, facilitando o conveniamento. Hoje nós temos uma atuação legitimada, ao contrário do momento em que nós chegamos, hoje nós podemos dizer que temos uma atuação bastante legitimada. Chegamos no 6º ano do governo, na ocasião de trabalho, e hoje, naquele momento, nós buscávamos licença para operar, e hoje, na verdade, acontece uma situação um pouco diferente. Nós somos buscados somos consultados sobre rumos, não apenas de um grupo específico da administração pública, mas por vários atores do município, que nos deixa muito contentes, e é para isso que nós estamos lá. E, em relação a esse trabalho com a Anglo, diríamos que a reserva inicial que nós tínhamos, numa relação que é bastante característica no setor de mineração, em que você vê um distanciamento entre comunidade, poder público e empresa, nós também fomos com a cautela inicial e que, na verdade, essa concepção mudou bastante. Nós vimos que a Anglo tinha o papel de agente de desenvolvimento e destravando processos, Marcelo Galo aqui ajudando no cotidiano para que, de fato, não fosse um mero financiador, e sim um ator no território, participando, engajado na discussão sobre políticas públicas, o que não é comum. né? Nós sabemos que não é comum preocupações dessa natureza. Essa publicação, essa metodologia será sistematizada em uma publicação maior, estará disponível em agosto para consulta dos senhores e senhoras, e mais esse sumário executivo dá conta, pelo menos, do mais breve que eu posso falar sobre isso. Ok? Muito obrigado.
Well, thank you very much, Sergio and Walter. I will certainly have a look at that myself, because it seems to be we're moving from, it's not just a mining company, it's a partnership. It's not just a mine, it's about institutional development in the state. It's not just tools for the mining process, it's tools for engagement. And quite a big experiment on many fronts. I mean, it actually makes me think that it could put Anglo Nickel in an extremely powerful position, or it could put it in a position where government is empowered and communities are empowered. And I'd quite like to know how far this work is empowering the communities to make the right choice. How far this is helping government to ensure that you comply better. You see what I mean? You could become very powerful in this way, or you could build capacity for people to hold you to account. Maybe you could quickly answer that question. I know it's not an easy one. Briefly, please.
Para essa pergunta, eu acho que é muito difícil a gente ser breve. Mas eu gostaria de, inicialmente, fazer um comentário. Simplesmente o seguinte, com tudo isso que está sendo feito, eu acho que uma pergunta que não pode deixar de vir, né, e que as pessoas não podem deixar de pensar é: qual a ligação disso, de uma empresa com a administração pública? Né? Eu quero fazer uma declaração que nós não temos o mínimo interesse, nós não temos por objetivo substituir o Estado. Nós não temos o mínimo interesse nisso. Mas nós temos interesse, sim, em que o legado da nossa atividade naquela região seja sustentável. Então, o que nós pensamos? A maneira com que a gente poderia fazer isso é a seguinte: nós sabemos que, eu costumo dizer que mineração é uma atividade que dá só uma safra. Então, nós temos que usar os recursos da melhor maneira possível, otimizando em todos os sentidos. E, por esse lado, a mineração ela tem sempre uma data para iniciar um projeto e uma data para terminar o projeto. Quando você inicia um projeto de mineração, a primeira coisa que você faz é um plano de fechamento de mina. Então, nós já sabemos o período que nós vamos estar naquela localidade. Então, nós queríamos procurar uma maneira de garantir que todos os benefícios gerados pela atividade da Anglo-América naquela região se tornasse uma atividade sustentável para um benefício sustentável para aquela região. Então, o benefício que nós geramos para a comunidade, além desses outros benefícios que foram citados, é o recolhimento de impostos, é a geração de impostos. Então, foi percebido, quando nós fizemos aquele levantamento no CIAT, aquela primeira avaliação que a gente faz usando essa ferramenta da Anglo, que nós deveríamos ajudar a administração pública a gerenciar bem aqueles recursos que vão vir com a atividade da mineração. Então, nós fizemos foi justamente esse link. Nós precisamos garantir que e implantar e ter uma mudança de cultura política. Como o Sérgio bem falou, ele identificou aqui, listou todos os problemas que você encontra na administração, principalmente numa cidade pequena. Então, nós queremos que o dinheiro que foi gerado pela atividade fosse o melhor, administrado da melhor maneira possível. Então, como fazer isso? Nós fomos procurar um parceiro forte, que pudesse nos ajudar, inclusive, para fazer a educação do pessoal. Inclusive, tem um programa dentro do programa da Agenda Pública, que é a Escola de Governo, que é um programa fantástico. Então, o nosso objetivo não temos por objetivo substituir o Estado, ou substituir o governo municipal ou o governo federal. Não. O que nós queremos é proporcionar ferramentas para a comunidade para que ela possa administrar bem isso aí. Esse é o objetivo. Talvez eu não tenha te respondido diretamente a tua pergunta, mas eu acho que era importante a gente fazer esse link para que a gente pudesse entender o que vem por trás. Então, nós não temos interesse em nos tornar nenhuma força a mais no município, nós como uma empresa.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you very much. That is a good answer, and I hope you can come back in 10 years' time and give us an independently verified answer, because I think this is really, really promising. I'd just like to ask one question before I open it up to the rest of the audience. I mean, clearly, much of this, the issue for the next 10 years is communities getting the mines they deserve and want, and they can make the right choice. And so I'd quite like to ask Lena, what has prevented all the other parts of the mining sector from really treating artisanal and small scale seriously? What prevents that from happening, and what could we do, and what could Anglo do, and other big players to improve the situation?
Well, I think one of the areas that has prevented a more positive engagement is legal frameworks on their own. Okay, so when you have an actor that is in informality or in illegality, then what you usually receive from companies is, how can we engage? We're going to be contradicting national laws if we engage with these people because they are illegal. So one of the limitations has been legal frameworks. Another that comes to my mind now is that there are actually many informal arrangements between owners of concessions and artisanal miners, but those arrangements are not formalized. So that's like another positive step that the industry could take in formalizing those relationships with artisanal miners. And the underlying reality is that only when artisanal miners are subjects of rights and duties, then this engagement can be positive. So that's why the whole idea of the need to bring them as legitimate players into the table is so relevant.
That's a great answer, Lena. Thank you. And again, there's a parallel with forestry. Many parts of the world, people who live in forests are treated as illegal, and yet the government wants sustainable, multiple-use forestry. And some of these people can manage everything. The animals, the trees, you give them the rights, and you call them local sustainable forest managers, and they do more or less the same thing. But they have the incentive to carry on with good ways forward. Now, questions and thoughts from participants here in the next 20 minutes. We have one there, sir. Yes, please. And there is a microphone coming to you. Please say your name and institution first. Thank you.
Hello, my name is William Mudford. I'm from the Australian National University, which is in Canberra, the capital of Australia. Australia's key bargaining position at Rio +20 is to get sustainable mining in the text. And from my research, I found this very concerning because what it does is it's facilitating Australia's aid diversion from our region to be given to Australian mining companies to be able to exploit the region. And their premise is that the Australian mining industry is the most sustainable in the world and how we can export it and support other communities. And it's absolutely ridiculous because the mining industry in Australia has created a false economy for Australia. It's absolutely hollow. All the infrastructure that's ever been created in Australia for the mining industry is only for the mining industry's use. We have massive coal mines in Queensland, one of the states of Australia, and basically the rail lines aren't able to be used by freight or by public for transportation. It's solely for the use of the coal mining companies, and that's just one example of the hollowness of the Australian industry, and one would assume industries around the world. How on earth can a mining company be truly held to accountable? I'm really intrigued by this project that Anglo American has talked about, because it just seems that how do we know that the structures that are being put in place and that the council, the local mayor and everything, if they came to a point of view where they saw that the mining industry, the nickel industry, was doing complete damage to their environment, how can they possibly speak up, change it, and tell the company that they don't want them in their community anymore, when the mining industry is the one providing all the money to support the public administration?
Thanks. So, yes, a good point. How do we make sure the industry invests in capital, human capital, natural capital, physical capital,
And
doesn't
how do
just,
we
and
also,
doesn't just asset
just one
strip?
extra point.
No, if you don't mind, I think you have made your point quite well. We have one person here.
How
and
do
then
you
there was another.
maintain it after the company has finished mining as well?
Sure, the whole cycle. And the gentleman here, could you use a microphone for the translators, please?
My name is Fred Heflin. I represent the Society for Mining, Metallurgy, and Exploration in the United States. I've mined in 26 states and over 300 or 400 different mines throughout the United States. We deal with local, county, state, and national government for our permits. We're required to comply with those permits. One of them requires a water runoff permit on mines down to 1 acre. So we do comply, and we do have to handle complaints from our landowners next door, from the county, the state, and the federal government. So we are complying. Now we, as a mining industry, are still very, very short of handling cultural matters, except for the very large companies which have large staffs. We just came from the communities forum yesterday, and sand and gravel alone is going to have to mine 200 or 300 billion tons to make the infrastructure coming up in the next 15 to 30 years. 200 or 300 billion. This is large. I'm giving a paper on rare earth minerals, which is the technology to make it green. We have to mine, but we have to do a lot better. And as part of my picture, I showed Ponte Vedra, which is an old rare earths mine, one of the finest resorts in the world. And of course, the finest gardens probably anywhere in the world is an old lime quarry in Vancouver, Butchert Gardens. So we can do a good job. We just have to do much better than we've done. And I agree. There's all kinds of examples of bad mining practices. That has to change. We have to do the good to give the perception to everybody that we can do it right. The perception has to be there, and that's the point of my speech on the 19th. Without perception, you're not going to get rare earths, and you're not going to get the technology, because there's association, radiation with it, and that has to be handled. And the people around there have to realize this is good, and they will take care of the health and safety of the people.
Thank you, Fred. We've got to do it right and be seen to do it right. We'll take a couple more points and then turn to the panel. There was a guy at the back. Yes, please, sir. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Pablo Lumerman from Argentina. I work in an NGO called Cambio Democrático that works a lot in socio-environmental mining conflicts in the region. I'm here with a couple of friends that we share sort of a regional dialogue on socio-environmental mining conflicts, and we are quite concerned about how do you see dialogue leading us to transform the structural causes of the socio-environmental conflicts around mining. We see that there is a lot of problems with policies, the way policies are designed, what are the purposes of those policies, the capacity of enforcement from government, but at the same time, the asymmetry of power between civil society and the other stakeholders, particularly local communities. sometimes the asymmetry of power is so big, so strong, that it's very difficult to engage in good dialogue, transformative dialogue. And at the same time, there are huge challenges for the next decade that needs to strengthen the engagement capacity for good dialogue. So I just wanted to share with you those questions.
Thank
what
you.
do you think about that?
Okay, so how do we shift from this eternal conflict to really transformative dialogue across the industry? Where's that platform for it? One or two more points, because you'll appreciate the panel doesn't know the audience until you talk to us. So one or two more points. Yeah. Oh, hi, Hannah. Hannah there. Hannah from Britain.
Hello, Hannah Ryder from the Department for International Development. I'm really interested in this point about what next. This question of, yes, we can deal with some of the standards, we know what those standards are, but how to get to the implementation stage. And I just wondered, what is the barrier to implementation? What are the key barriers that are being brought up? There was mention of questions of capacity, of monitoring, the need for monitoring and evaluation, the need for managing compliance. But what about things like innovation? What about things like, is it about effectiveness or simplicity of what implementation means? Is it trying to get these standards more related to the core business of what these firms are doing? Just throwing out a few ideas there.
Thank you. I think that helps us a lot, Hannah. I mean, most of the comments now have been about big challenges. One point made about we really need to get to grips with them, the industry is determined to. But how do we see the panel as, yes, indeed, maybe the first hurdle that needs to be gone through? I'm going to go down the panel here very briefly. Do you mind, Ben, starting? Just one thing, again, it goes back to the one thing in the next 10 years that you reckon we should push for.
Sure, and I think I'd pick up that was certainly a point mentioned by Abby, and I think sort of Caroline on the panel that I didn't say anything on, which I think resonates across a lot of things here, is this issue of government capacity building. Without a doubt, that is a huge challenge, and a challenge for industry, in that industry, and I've sort of heard of examples where industry doesn't want to be put in the place where it's seen to be taking over, and you allude to this as well, Steve, where industry is seen to have power over government or is seen to be playing the role of government. That's not in the interests of industry to be in that position. They need strong government, they need community buy-in and community trust, and they want that, and it's in their interest to have that. We were, for those of you at the session yesterday, Nick Holland, who's one of the CEOs of our member companies, talked about this very thing. I think Steve paraphrased him, but he talked about this community trust issue. And how do you get that capacity building?
Excellent, thank you. Lena, you've already addressed the legal framework in response to these questions.
Well, I just want to bring to the table the idea that in order to have more horizontal conversations within the industry, there's an urgent need of let's say having a social contract around mining. I mean, there's a huge, there's actually going to have to be no-go areas to balance huge biodiversity hotspots, for example. And then again, when it goes into government capacities as well. Just one example, I am originally from Colombia, and we're just having this mining boom in the country, and the country as a whole doesn't really know what to do about mining. Where do we do big-scale, large-scale mining? Where do we leave space for artisanal mining? For whom is this going to be? So there's a whole discussion on a social contract around mining.
Thanks. Earlier, Caroline, you talked about the need for some kind of continuing dialogue to sort these things out. Is this something you would stress for the social contract?
I think the key point is that social issues, people issues, are time-consuming, whether it's at the mine level, at the national level in Colombia, or trying to get some consensus across international, multinational behavior. And we have yet to come to grips with how time-consuming that is. So in answer to the question about implementation, one of the problems I see is that you have leadership at the chief executive corporate level. You have the people who are at the coalface working daily with the communities and on site, who all get this and really want to do something about it. And I think one of the problems is the sort of what I call the permafrost of middle managers who don't have, as part of their performance assessment, that these issues really matter to the social license to operate of the company. And until we spend the time to really explain and get behaviour change in that group, I think we're going to have problems. But this, I think we cannot underestimate how time-consuming people issues are. It's not like there is a technical solution.
Walter, I wonder if I may, instead of asking you now to respond, I understand we have youth and community representatives from your Anglo project here. I wonder if they might like to address some of the questions. Would that be possible? With roving microphone down to the front, please.
Bom dia, né? O que eu queria falar é o seguinte, que assim, é muito difícil, né? É um começo que a gente está tendo, mas o que eu acho importante como comunidade, né, é que a Anglo-América ela se interessa assim, não trabalhar sozinha, mas dar voz ativa à sociedade, à comunidade, para que a gente possa participar, né? Que não só apenas a empresa ou o governo, mas a sociedade participe também, dê a sua opinião, né? Tem assim facilidade de ter o controle social. Eu acho que isso é muito importante, pelo menos assim dentro de Barro Alto nós estamos vivendo assim um começo, né? Mas a gente está buscando melhorar a cada dia mais, fortalecer cada dia mais a sociedade, né? Nesse sentido de busca em parceria, sendo assim todos juntos em busca de um argumento apenas, né? Melhorar muita coisa. Obrigada.
Are you youth or community or both? You're obviously very young.
Eu sou a presidente do Conselho de Assistência Social de Barro Alto.
Thank you. Thank you. And now, Walter, what would be the one thing that would help Anglo-Nickel to do this much better? The big barrier in your way for making progress?
Bem, eu acho que todos nós que estamos aqui, nós conhecemos os grandes desafios que nós temos na área de mineração ou em qualquer área de desenvolvimento industrial com relação a um desenvolvimento sustentável. Eu acredito que a ferramenta mais importante que a gente tem no sentido de implementarmos um desenvolvimento sustentável é a construção de parcerias, realmente de parcerias fortes. O setor público e o setor privado, eles têm que estar juntos e suportados por especialistas. E esses especialistas, eu acredito que devem ser justamente as ONGs que estejam capacitadas para exercer aquela atividade que você realmente precisa ali. Então, eu acho que todos esses atores trabalhando junto, nós podemos sim pensar em redefinir um novo modelo de desenvolvimento. Inclusive, esse modelo de desenvolvimento visando a sustentabilidade e melhorando a qualidade de vida, protegendo o meio ambiente e gerando valor, lógico, para todos os stakeholders, né? E também para os parceiros. Eu acho que o segredo de tudo isso é justamente essa parceria, porque ninguém faz nada sozinho. Então nós vamos ter que trabalhar juntos. Muito.
Thanks, Walter. And lastly to you, Sergio, you are one of these experts who are helping to facilitate the partnerships. What would be the next step so that we have more of this kind of work in Brazil, in the world. 1 or 2 points.
Eu acho que uma das preocupações fundamentais é não enfraquecer o Estado. Eu acho que eu queria retomar esse aspecto, porque não é porque nós estamos no território como uma organização que atua comprometida com a agenda do município, comprometida com a população, mas nós não podemos substituir tarefas que são prerrogativa do Estado. Então, o cuidado em iniciativas do gênero é que a perspectiva seja de desenvolvimento de capacidades. Eu acho que, fundamentalmente, articulando o governo, nesse caso, o governo local, com instâncias provinciais, com instâncias federais, para que essa capacidade se perpetue, né? Ou seja, nós não podemos formar clientes, nós não podemos ter dependências que se estabelecem, relações de dependência, por exemplo, com um conselho ou com uma secretaria ou com uma área determinada da prefeitura, qualquer que seja ela. Desde o primeiro dia é importante que haja uma perspectiva de independização. Como é que mostrar o caminho das pedras. Então, não é porque eu sei fazer um convênio, não é porque eu sei como acessar o recurso, que eu preciso reter essa informação. Então, acho que a preocupação, de maneira geral, para iniciativas do gênero em outras localidades, é que nós não podemos fazer pelo governo, nós não podemos formar clientes, clientela, e nessa perspectiva da assimetria do diálogo, eu acredito, só para comentar por alto, achei uma das perguntas muito interessantes para comentar. Se você não fortalece capital social, se você não tem essa perspectiva de base, não é porque nós temos estruturas formais, por exemplo, de participação social, que essas estruturas formais, por si só, garantam que haja maior participação da sociedade nas políticas públicas. Nós temos que fazer um trabalho de longo prazo, de base. As pessoas, aqui no Brasil há uma máxima, as pessoas não moram no estado, elas moram nas cidades. Ok, eu vou mais além. As pessoas não moram apenas nas cidades, as pessoas moram em bairros. Então você precisa ter uma perspectiva de descentralização da ação do Estado no território. E é lá que as pessoas, tão distantes desse olhar, aquele Estado distante, começam a encontrar razões de ser para participar. Eu posso fazer diferença? Posso, mas não podemos ser ingênuos. Vão encontrar barreiras, vão encontrar... nós temos exemplos, né? Quando se veta ou se contraria alguma ação que o governo municipal tinha como preocupação, como agenda, vão encontrar represálias. Então, nós temos que fortalecer as lideranças, nós temos que ter uma visão, portanto, não tecnocrática. Eu acho que a preocupação deve ser nessa direção, um olhar mais amplo.
Thank you very much, Sergio. We have to bring the meeting to a close. I think in the discussion and the panel, with the panel's help, we have some of the elements of an agenda for the mining sector to move forward in partnership for the next 10 years, issues of forming a social contract for individual mines, for the sector, issues of government capacity building, issues of the longevity of the mine, what to do through the whole process, and the social issues along the way. Quite a lot of things we have here, and Emma at the front has been capturing them. The discussion on MMSD plus 10 is available on IIED's website, iied.org. And we're structuring the website so people can continue to help us to build, as an independent research group, help have a platform to build an agenda for the next 10 years. So I'd like to thank as well ICMM, our partners in this session. We are independent, but ICMM sees the value of independent research and has helped to sponsor this session. So thank you, Ben, colleagues. I'd like to thank the whole panel, including Anglo Nickel, for being brave enough to present something as maybe a good way for the future. It's always, a very brave thing to do, and I think people have appreciated that. And thanks to everybody for contributing well. Thanks to the panel.